Welcome to the Leadership Exposé podcast. This podcast is for purpose-driven leaders at diverse levels and organizations around the world who are seeking to scale and transform their leadership, to level up their business, and to create an impact on the lives of people all around them. Business and boardroom topics, trends, innovation, transformation, and the intersection with leadership is the focus. We enable success. I'm your host, Shiv Paul. In this edition, we welcome Shiv Paul, CEO of Caprihan Consulting, based in the UK. Shiv has previously partnered with top-tier consulting firms and businesses. He brings mastery in the areas of inclusion, transformation, strategy, and wellness consulting. Shiv is a speaker and also holds various board roles. We'll hear about Shiv, his journey, and learn insights on the diverse components of inclusion, change, and transformation, amongst other things, and how businesses can adopt and embed this seamlessly. Shiv, welcome. How are you doing today?
Thank you very much. It's a great pleasure to be here. I'm doing well. I'm doing well. Things are busy, but that's always a good thing, right? But yeah, thank you for having me. I'm very excited to be here.
Wonderful, Shiv. You know, you and I have met before, but for the purposes of our audience, tell us, where are you based?
So I am now based back in my hometown of Epsom in Surrey, which is just outside London, probably about 20 miles. This is where I wasn't born here, but I grew up here. But I had been living in Manhattan for about 15 years, from 2005 up until 2020. And I came back for a visit in 2020. And then, of course, as everyone knows, the entire world changed very drastically, and I just decided it was the right time for me to move back. So
Wonderful.
Yeah, I'm currently based there.
Wonderful, wonderful. We're both UK based.
Yeah. And we have the same last names. People are
And we
going to
have
think
the
we're
same
brothers,
last name. I was
right?
going to bring that up. Yeah. Well, wonderful. Shiv, I'm keen to hear about your leadership journey, both from a personal perspective and from a professional perspective, and that intersection. Where did it all begin? Tell us briefly, and then we'll take it from there.
Yeah, so very briefly, my corporate career was in consulting, in management consulting, for about 20 years. But my path there was quite sort of meandering. I think for a lot of my life, I wasn't necessarily either entirely sure what I wanted to do, or didn't necessarily have the confidence to commit to doing it. And so I tended to either do things that I was good at, or things that were sort of natural to my environment. And what I mean by that is, I went to university and I did a master's in French, actually. And the reason I did that was because I was good at languages and I didn't really know what to do. And the reason I went to university was because in the environment I grew up in, everybody went. So it was not really with a ton of thought about that. And sort of dabbled in a few different kinds of areas, and in a few different countries. But then in 2000, a friend of mine was working at a consulting firm, and she just suggested that I apply, and I did. And my consulting career was always in the realms of digital transformation and change management. And so I think even in consulting for a long time, I was sort of questioning what was I even really doing there, but found that if I was able to really focus on working with people to think about changes that they needed to make, and really we're talking about behavioral changes or changes in minds and hearts, right? From the point of view of process, culture, structure, to support different kinds of implementations, that gave me a certain level of satisfaction. I call myself a facilitator of change. And so all of the jobs that I've had, the career that I've had, all of the extracurricular work I've done as a volunteer, all of the different sort of mechanisms that I've dabbled in, have all had that theme. It's all about wanting to help people make change, to feel more included, to be able to show up more authentically. And it took me a while to recognize that that was the pattern. But even in the areas where I wasn't necessarily so satisfied with what I was doing. I tried to adopt that perspective of how can I bring my values or my passion for helping facilitate change into those proceedings.
Yeah. Amazing. Amazing. So, Shiv, that's such an, amazing journey, and the areas of focus. You talked about change, transformation. What is it that you're focusing on now? Because I mean, these are pretty broad topics here, and there's the wellness aspect as well, and behavioral change as well. What's your main focus at this juncture?
Yeah, that's a great question. So in sort of 2021, I think I left consulting and set up on my own. And now, um, through the work that I do as a strategist, a coach, a workshop facilitator, I help organizations and their workforces and individuals to develop leadership capabilities, to prepare for success, and to develop sustainable strategies that make sense to them to achieve their very clearly articulated goals. So I'll work with organizations and individuals to think about those things. What are the goals that you really want to achieve? How can you sustain a level of motivation through a strategy that makes sense to you? And so a lot of it is really around leadership capability building, but I specialize in diversity, equity, and inclusion. So a lot of the work that I do is with marginalized communities or underrepresented talent to help them find ways to exercise more choice, more power, more control over the professional direction that they're going in, but also how can that really impact their personal lives as well.
Yeah. The topics of diversity and inclusion is such an important one, especially in the last decades. It's become even more prominent with companies, different sectors, and so forth. With you being a global leader, I look at you as a global leader because you've worked internationally, you've worked in different countries,
Mm.
you interact with different clients as well, internationally. Having lived in New York, now in London, worked in different environments, different types of organizations, uh, between geographies, what are your thoughts around diversity and inclusion in terms of maturity, awareness? What's your view on it?
So it's an interesting question and sort of quite a broad one, I think. I mean, the diversity and inclusion has started to really surface a lot more in conversation. I mean, these are not new concepts. They've been around for a long time and they weren't always called diversity and inclusion, right? Back in the 60s, in the US, it was called affirmative action. Now people are starting to really lead with inclusion, right, over diversity. But there's a reason those things go together. So there definitely are cultural nuances, in the US. When you're talking about D&I, it's very heavily based on race and ethnicity.
True.
I think a lot in Europe and the UK, they are talking about those types of things in company settings. But really encouraging companies to kind of go beyond that. Like, what are the invisible dimensions of diversity that really impacts the way that we get a sense of identity? And how can we get more information about that to have richer relationships and so on and so forth? So, I think it's surfacing a lot more in conversations in great part because of what's happened in the last 3 years. After George Floyd was murdered, and there was a huge spotlight on social injustice. COVID, I think, put a spotlight on inequity and so on and so forth. And I think it really spotlighted a lot of our leaders, right, our hierarchical leaders in our countries and so on and so forth, who were not really operating with a great deal of authenticity or a great moral compass. So I think in many ways it can no longer be avoided. All of these concepts around diversity, inclusion, belonging, acceptance, and so on and so forth, they are so prevalent everywhere. in all areas of society that you can't really ignore it. But what I've noticed has changed is particularly for companies that are engaged in wanting to make change in this area. I think whereas before a lot of companies, as often clients do, wanted a kind of quick fix in terms of, okay, what is my competitor doing in terms of D&I? Can I not just model myself on that strategy? I think they're now sort of understanding beyond the intellectual understanding of that, they're sort of coming at it from a more emotional perspective. And I think a lot of organizations are getting more invested in thinking about diversity and inclusion in their organizations, but are saying, look, we've realized we just don't know what we're doing and we really, really need help. So as well as maybe putting money behind this, we really want to be committed to making the change and tracking the success of that change. So I think things have moved, which is great to see. And particularly kind of, I think in terms of that commitment that organizations particularly have in wanting to make change.
Yeah.
Did that answer your question?
Absolutely, Shiv. I mean, my experience with some of the clients that I work with, I see the same thing as well. So previously, and it still is the case with several segments of clients, whether it's small, medium, large, or even sector-wise, where it's a copy and paste of what maybe other firms are doing for the purposes of just tick boxing the exercises of D&I.
Yeah.
Then there are also other firms that are actually taking a little bit more meaning to it and bring some investment to the whole mix of it. And that's because of different levels of awareness and direction, from the executive teams, from talent hiring to boards and so forth, that are actually making it a key agenda item as well. So I'm seeing that as well as a big shift. So I completely agree and align with your assessment of it.
Yeah.
And it's only going to get better. I'm hoping. Yeah.
I think so. I hope so. I was asked. This probably was like within the last year. I think I was on another sort of panel discussion, and people were asking all of us, "Do you think it's going to get worse or better?" And I said, "I think it's going to get worse before it gets better."
Sure.
Because often, when you hit the real low points, there really is nothing else to do except get better. But I'd be interested to know your thoughts around organizations, how they're sort of approaching the implementation of diversity and inclusion. Because one of the things that I really focus on and I bring into the conversations or the work that I do with organizations is coupling that with a change management strategy.
Yeah.
Now, a lot of companies don't like that terminology, change management, but I think one of the great reasons that any kind of transformation that you're trying to introduce into your organization fails is because there is lack of managing that change in the organization. And when we talk about D&I, we're really talking about how do you make cultural shifts, right, in an organization. So that does affect your not just process related activities of people in the workforce. But it's changing behaviors, it's changing minds, it's changing hearts, right? And so I'm interested to know if you've seen that shift where companies are starting to make that connection that you can't really implement a D&I strategy if you're not also coupling that with a change management strategy.
I completely see that. And actually, it's even going further, and you touched on a point as to that intersection between D&I and or the wider D&I and a change management strategy, whatever they want to call it. Some organizations call it an enablement strategy, for example. There's one client, it's a medium-sized organization. They've retermed it. They don't like the word change. They don't like the word transformation, but let's call it enablement. But bringing all of that and bringing a bit of structure to that and integrating it into a work that would be embedded into the business as usual environment is what they've taken a strategy on. But on top of that, what is really working, aside from just making it into a program or a strategy, is the sponsorship. and the accountability. So there
Mhm.
is the CEO in some instances. So it was interesting. There was a debate at one of the organizations. Well, this is all cultural related stuff. This is all behaviors, all touchy-feely. Yes, of course, we need to provide some stats and so forth. HR will take care of it.
Yeah.
Well, yes, but it needs to be in partnership with the CEO
Yeah.
and the board. And that's okay if it's HR, but HR needs to have a seat at the table as well.
Yeah, absolutely. 100%. I mean,
Yeah.
it needs to have very clear sponsorship
Mm.
and in an organization at those hierarchical levels, at that leadership level. Um, but for a lot of organizations, depending on where they are on the maturity curve on of D&I, you will know this, you will have seen this as well, right? It's not uncommon for them to put that in the hands of one person or one department, and that usually is always HR, right? Is where
Yeah.
it
Yeah.
starts,
Yeah.
and maybe they will bring in a sort of an actual D&I person to run that show and so on and so forth.
Yeah.
But I think uh, you'll probably be familiar with this as well, right? We've both been working in D&I for a long time, and the old joke is that when you work in this space, the goal is to do yourself out of a job, right? We want to get to a stage where
Yeah.
it is truly shared responsibility among all of the employees in the workforce to uphold those cultural tenets of the organization, so that it's not just driven by one person or one department or organization. And I think that's where you really need to have that clear sponsorship at
Yeah.
a leadership level to understand that.
Yeah.
Because once you elevate in an organization, right, or you're any kind of figure of authority, you can't absent from being a role model. You are one. So the choice is yours, whether you're a good one or not. And I think a lot of people are really starting to understand what that means as well when you assume that mantle of being a role model.
Yeah. Shiv, you're a leader in your own right. Are there any experiences or stories that you can share that comes to mind from the time when you were a leader or currently with clients that have resulted in a highly positive outcome?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I mean, I spend a lot of time delivering programs for underrepresented talent and a lot for, diversity by ethnicity. And there are, quite specific challenges that, ethnic minorities that we will face, in particularly in the workplace. I mean, what is true is that the majority of people will suffer from some kind of challenge on a daily basis in their workplace. In fact, there's a McKinsey study, I think it's from 2020, which says that 84% of people suffer a form of microaggression on a daily basis.
Mm.
So when you're talking about 84%, you're pretty much talking about everybody, right? But what is also true is that if you belong to a marginalized community, you are going to experience those microaggressions with more consistency and frequency than other people. And the more marginalized communities you belong to, the higher the frequency, the higher the consistency, and so on and so forth. So I do a lot of programs where I work with ethnic minority groups, again, to help them understand where they can exercise more control, more power. And part of that is looking at um, challenges that they faced in the past, which have impacted their ability to progress towards their goals. And that's not always an easy thing. But I've never done one of those programs where that has not been beneficial for the participant. And it's really gratifying work because in some cases, some of these narratives we've been holding on to, or some of these assumptions that have been made about us, we can, and I can attest to this myself, sometimes we hold on to those for years,
Yeah.
right? And so doing this kind of work, which helps people release those, and does help them, unleash more of their potential, is I find is it personally really gratifying. But it's great to see even people who are sort of skeptical about engaging in that to help them develop professionally, right? People are quite skeptical of that. To see them at the end of these programs say, I really wasn't sure about you or how this is going to go, but actually it's really made a big impact in my life everywhere,
Yeah.
I think is really gratifying. So at that kind of level,
Yeah.
certainly I've seen a lot of positivity and a lot of positive change.
Yeah.
But the other thing I would say is that it's also uh, it shows the commitment of these organizations that they are engaging in bringing in these types of programs and so on and so forth. And I think particularly moving away from one-off workshops. Like, I'd be interested to know what you think about this, because I read something the other day that sort of validated what I had been thinking, but articulated in a better way than I was able to do for myself.
Yeah.
And probably better than I'm going to be able to do right now. But was basically saying that actually one-off workshops around things like unconscious bias and diversity and inclusion actually don't really work, and in some cases can be detrimental to the progress of a D&I initiative or agenda in an organization, because what it might do is sort of validate for people in a 1 hour workshop that they either know what they're doing, or they've sort of gone through this process and they can eradicate that, and they'll just continue to do what they were doing before.
Yeah.
And I've always been a believer in that. I think, this is a process, not an event.
Yeah.
And so you can't really fix any kinds of issues that you're having in your organization in a workshop that lasts 1 hour, right? Or 2 hours or something like that.
Yeah.
Definitely sort of more consistent programs and recurring programs, I think, for me, are the way to go. But I'm interested to know if you've heard anything similar in terms of that.
Yeah, no, I was actually going to ask the same thing in a different way, but I'll give you my view. You're absolutely right. I feel these visitor type of workshops, or workshops that just invites visitors to come in for an hour or for half a day and then go back into your normal ways of doing, isn't sustainable.
Yeah.
It might work for a particular type of a topic, like how do you solve a problem, or how do you move one particular part of a small strategy to from point A to point B, and you might be able to do a workshop. But when you're actually looking at cultural shifts and with an expertise of behavioral mindset shifts and so forth, that needs to be a bit of a movement, I think, within the
Yeah.
organization. What do you think? I mean, it's not just
Yeah.
one workshop. It's actually it's a movement. It
Yeah.
takes time. It's a journey, right?
Absolutely. And when you think about it, it's kind of crazy that you would even imagine that that a workshop, or a 1 hour, 2 hour workshop would help to create that behavior change, right? You don't hire a trainer because you want to get really fit and do a 1 hour session and say, well, why am I not fitter?
Yeah.
Is that the answer? Like, why have I not got a six pack and all this kind of thing? So, I call it being capability fit.
Yeah.
And, when I've seen it firsthand in my career, where people have been, you know, hauled up for microaggressive behavior or racist behavior or sexual harassment or things of that nature. And I have seen it will literally happen. They will be given some training around, how to not sexually harass people, how to not be racist and that kind of thing. And actually what that does is it does nothing for the person that was the victim of that.
Yeah.
And what it does is send a signal to everyone else that actually, if I do that, as long as I do my job well, then the only repercussion is I've got to do a training for like an hour, and then I can just carry on doing what I'm doing.
Yeah.
So it doesn't really do anything to, one, help eradicate that behavior.
Yeah.
But it doesn't, I think it only serves to kind of reinforce some toxic behavior that's already happening, right?
Yeah.
So then you start to get into, let's say, as an organization, if you are supporting that and enabling that, then are you really being authentic? You
Yeah.
say that you want to make change, you say that you want to hold people accountable, you say that you want people to feel safe and included, but
Yeah.
actually, when people are called out on that behavior, nothing happens to them. What does
Yeah.
that really mean? And
Yeah.
that's if people are called out on that behavior. People don't often feel safe to call out that behavior in the first place.
Yeah. Yeah. So
So
yeah, no, completely agree. So Shiv, companies are going through change, going through transformation. They may not want to admit it, but they are going through that, and especially during the cycle of the year, they've got their targets and so forth. Um, if companies are looking to bring in some expertise on D&I or bring in that intersection of change management or transformation into the whole mix and create a bit of a program around that. At a very top level, how do you position yourself within some of these organizations? Do you bring some
so
kind of a framework, or do you
yeah.
actually just have conversations with them to see where they're at and then build some form of target model?
Yeah, so it's a process, right? And uh, it has to start with some kind of diagnostic. So in terms of my approach, right? If I'm contracted to do that, or engaged in a relationship with an organization, I'd want to see what kind of existing research they have, from kind of employee survey data or so on and so forth. I would do a bunch of interviews to kind of really get underneath, how do people really feel? What's the sort of pulse check on that organization? And then I think from there, you need to build a really a sort of bespoke framework and plug in a model to that for that organization. And this is where, we were saying before that we both had a lot of clients might come to us and say, look, just tell me what my competitor's doing and I'll do
Yeah,
it. It
yeah,
doesn't work that way, right?
yeah,
Because when you talk about culture,
yeah,
that's very particular to an organization. And there are lots of nuances to that that have to be accounted for. And so you can't underestimate the amount of research that has to be done before you even implement anything. Because otherwise, what will happen is you'll deliver something that doesn't really address the cultural nuances of an organization, and therefore it won't stick,
yeah,
right? And that's the biggest issue
yeah,
that any kind of implementation or transformation
yeah,
that organizations suffer from is how do you make this sticky,
yeah,
right? How
yeah,
do you ensure that it's going to continue after someone like me or another organization has extracted? Because
yeah,
that's also the point, right? You don't necessarily want um, to have a consultancy, a relationship with a consultancy for years and years and years on end, right? At
yeah,
some point, you want to be armed as an organization with the skills, with the tools, with the techniques, so that somebody can extract and you can become self-sustaining.
yeah,
So in terms of in term very high level, right? That's the sort of approach that I would take, and
yeah,
of
yeah.
course, different kinds of workshops and focus groups and so on and so forth would help inform all of that.
Yeah, I can completely relate to that. I mean, like that's similar to some of the work that I do with clients as well. I mean, like it's that diagnostic just to get that top level understanding of where they're at, and then having those honest conversations with the executives as to what's missing and what they can potentially do to improve, right? And if you, I want to get a view from you as well on this one, whether you found progressive minded leaders where they actually accept your findings and actually work with you to improve on that and maybe tailor it, or whether they actually say, well, he or she is just another, it's
Yeah.
just yet another report.
And yeah, it's a really interesting thing. We could talk about this for hours, I think. And the answer is it depends, right? And this is where you really realize after you've done that work and you present that initial finding back, you realize what the level of commitment is. Is somebody really committed to change? Because organizations are like people, right? And as much as individuals, in order to uh, improve ourselves and to choose more effective behavior and to manage our biases and so on and so forth, we have to do a lot of introspection,
Yeah.
really get under the hood with
Yeah.
no judgment, but
Yeah.
with honesty to say, well, what is going on here and what do I need to work on? Organizations need to do the same thing. And that's uncomfortable for both individuals and organizations. So, I think the interesting thing for me is having that initial conversation, as you say, with people at that leadership level. And that's when you really quickly will be able to tell actually how into this are you really?
Yeah.
And for it's challenging for businesses. All businesses are in the business of relationships,
Mhm.
right? Without creating, maintaining, cultivating relationships, you have no business, right? But I think the challenge that we have is businesses are also in the business of making money, right? But the currency of relationships is trust. It's not financial. And I think this is where we've seen lots of examples of companies that have presented themselves as being authentic and presented themselves as being for the customer in order to capture more market share.
Yeah.
And it has come to light that actually they don't believe what they're selling.
Yeah.
And in some cases, those companies have completely collapsed, right? Or they've lost a ton of market share because people also are not stupid and they're very wise to the fact that I'm buying this from you, but you're not buying it and using it yourself. Why is that? I'd
Yeah.
rather then go to, and this is particularly true of younger generations who are much more interested in aligning with brands who share similar values to them or working for companies that share similar values to them. And they're quite willing to not go there
Yeah.
if they realize that's the case and very quickly. So, I think a lot of companies are also realizing, and it sort of comes back to what we were saying before, are now realizing that while they may have intellectually understood the need for D&I, they are emotionally behind that as well.
Yeah.
Because the data surrounding companies that are diverse and inclusive consistently outperforming their competitors is not new. That's
Yeah.
been around for decades,
True.
right?
True.
So why are not more companies doing that? And like I say, I think it's a sort of confluence of everything that's been happening in the last 3 years and everything that, how that has impacted all areas of our society and the countries that we live in
Yeah.
that has contributed to that change, if that makes sense.
Yeah. No, absolutely. Amazing, Shiv. Um, Shiv, you've had a lot of twists and turns personally, professionally. Share with us one thing or a couple of things that's your secret formula to your success.
My secret formula to success, that's a good question. I think it is it's around presenting, actually, it's really understanding what my values are
Mm.
and as much as possible being able to stand by those. And I've been in lots of situations where those values were not being served, lots of jobs, different parts of my career, and so on and so forth. And that doesn't necessarily mean that they were really, really awful experiences, right? They served a purpose in some way. But, generally, when we are feeling out of balance, right, and we're feeling suppressed, repressed, depressed, all of the kind of pressure words, it's usually because one or more of our values are being messed with. And we're either doing that to ourselves or someone else is doing that to us.
Yeah.
And so I think it took me a really long time. And it took George Floyd's murder and global pandemic and everything that kind of got really shaken up there for me to really look at whether I was actually living according to my values and to what degree. And that's what really caused me to make change. And that allowed me to, I think, show up more authentically, right? I mean, I think if you operate from your point of truth, you're very rarely going to go wrong,
Yeah.
and you're less likely to worry about repercussions,
Yeah.
right? What other people think of you, or what narratives are going to be spun about you, and those sorts of things.
Yeah.
So, not sure if that entirely answered your
It
question, but I
complete,
I think as
completely
much as
did.
possible, I try to come at situations with that.
That I feel is such an uber formula to success: being authentic, being aligned to your values, not just on paper. We talk about values, and we sometimes jot down a few values, but really being true to yourself and really being aligned to your true north.
Yeah. Yeah.
It is such an important. I like the way you position it. I mean, like in terms of conversations or in terms of challenge, that's when you really call out your values and really test it out, right?
Yeah.
And being authentic to yourself really makes a big difference. So when you've mastered a lot of that to a large extent, that's a big formula to success, because you're able to navigate through change and through adversity, and whatever throws your way, right?
Yeah. I think so. And I think what it does is it it puts you in a position to um, receive more interactions and experiences with um, people or situations or circumstances that are more aligned to how you feel,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
I think you're in that sort of position. And brands are the same.
yeah,
Organizations are exactly the same. The really great brands who are presenting this notion of authenticity and really showing that with everything that they're doing,
yeah,
for me, are the ones that I want to be aligned with, right? Virgin Atlantic is one of the best challenger brands for me out there,
yeah,
because I love what they stand for. I love their messaging. They're very diligent about how they want to ensure that sense of inclusion and belonging, not just for their customer base, but for their customers who are their internal workforce.
yeah.
I feel like you can really see that. So yeah, but I have to mull that over a little bit more.
Yeah, yeah. No, wonderful, Shiv. Let's keep talking about you. What does a day in the life of Shiv look like these days, morning
Uh,
to morning to evening?
so that that's one of my favorite interview questions to ask people to describe
Yeah,
that, and I won't
yeah,
do that in excruciating detail. But what I will say is the work that I do now and the life that I live now,
yeah,
I have been in some way, shape, or form working towards for a really long time, and in some cases consciously and mindfully, and in some cases not, right? Um, but I'm very blessed. Touch wood. I have great family. I have great friends. I love the work that I do, and it really depends because I work for myself. Um, but 5:30 in the morning, I'm taking my dog out, and then I will go to the gym. Physical activity is really important to me, and then usually it's a lot of workshop facilitation and a lot of coaching. And
yeah,
actually, I'd be interested to know if you've noticed this difference. A lot of I work across all industries and sectors, and as a coach, I coach everybody from young adults who are going to their first jobs to C-level executives. But I've noticed um, recently that more of my coaching clients are at that C-suite level.
yeah,
So
yeah,
I've noticed that they are getting really engaged and understanding that actually coaching is really helpful and beneficial. And I think before it had this kind of like touchy-feely sort
yeah,
of narrative around it.
yeah.
Um, but that has definitely changed. So in terms of my day, it's sort of a mix of those types of things.
Yeah.
But have you noticed that change yourself in
I
terms of
Yeah, I have, and it varies from different organizations, to different sizes of organizations, different sectors as well. But there's a general trend where leaders, I mean, like you, where you coach and mentor executives, especially, if I give an example of some of the startup organizations or maybe even mid-sized organizations who are looking to scale, they are actually eager to learn and to
yeah,
hear, because there's lots that they want to grow themselves on, and within their teams. It's not just about the people aspect, it's about the business aspect. But how can, the people aspect is such an important part of it in order to actually build a business.
yeah,
So they want to better themselves. And then with some of the established organizations, I'm actually seeing that is becoming more important, because and you would have noticed this, Shiv, with larger organization, because of the complexity, the intricacies, and the levels of toxicity, there's a higher need for executives to come out of all of this and kind of learn how to deal with problems in a different way. So I completely agree with you.
Yeah.
People are becoming much more open to being coached or to be mentored. There's obviously the odd ones where they're very, very firm in their own views, and
Yeah.
but when they open up, sometimes when they have that trust between yourself and them, then they kind of open up and release their guard.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And I mean, pretty much, anybody that anyone admires, um, or looks at, in terms of being successful, or whatever that definition is for that person,
Yeah.
guaranteed, whoever they are thinking about has somebody in their life who acts as some kind of coach. Now, they may not call them a coach,
Yeah.
but they are in some way helping them think through things, or facilitating them to come up with strategies or goals, and so on and so forth. So it makes sense, right? And there's a reason that sports teams and analogies are always used in the business setting, and like all sports people and teams have coaches, right?
Yeah. True.
So it's good to see people kind of finally making that connection, I think.
Yeah. Yeah. Shiv, you're doing great work with leaders, with executives, with boards, with people. You're basically changing lives for the better. We're coming to a close now, Shiv. Are there any closing messages or a challenge to other leaders, whether they're executive leaders or board members or business organizations, industries, that you want to share with here?
So there's two things there. I mean, my challenge to people, right? We all have the ability to be leaders. We are all leaders, right? Leadership is a set of capabilities. But in an organization, from a hierarchical perspective, or kind of like a role title perspective, of course, we have leadership at, upper levels in organizations. But to everybody, I would say, don't be afraid of the introspection. And if you are going to do this work, there's no judgment to display here. Like, don't judge yourself for it. Approach it with awareness, with acknowledgement, and just see what is a small change you can make right in the next week in terms of behavior change, or developing curiosity, or something of that nature. What's a 5% change you can make? Sometimes we get really overwhelmed with the whole agenda, and it quickly becomes very unsustainable. So small changes, I think, are key. And then, I think it took me a long time to learn this, with all the experiences that I've had. But I would just say to people, whatever you do, you'll get there. You
Yeah.
are, in other words, just because you have not achieved what you want in the way that you want, does not mean you're in the wrong place, or you've made the wrong choices. Whatever you're doing, you will get there.
Words of wisdom and a challenge from Shiv. Thank you very much for being with us today and sharing your journey, your insights, and an experience as well. Thank you very much, Shiv.
Thank you so much.
Wonderful. Okay, folks, thank you very much for listening in, and stay tuned for our next episode on with a chief sustainability officer who shares her journey on bringing strategic lens to ESG, and how both regulated and non-regulated firms have the opportunity to adopt this. Stay tuned. Hey, I hope you enjoy the podcast. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel. You're now seeing this part of the video also because you consume some of my content, insights, and teachings. Maybe you've been to my LinkedIn page or website, or seen other social media ads, or listened to my podcast. I'm Shiv Paul, a business and transformational executive coach, strategic advisor, leader, and board member. I've been in diverse roles: corporate executive, entrepreneur, and worked with businesses and firms of all sizes, built and launched businesses, created high-impact boards, and so forth in 4 continents. I get it. I've been there, done that, But what is different is I bring a unique perspective and a playbook. I've helped 100 plus business leaders just like you to scale and align their leadership, top teams, the board, and overall business for growth. Leaders like Ivana from medium-sized company in the EU who grew 150% and expanded globally in under 5 months. After she started to work with me over facilitated sessions in an initial 3 days, I helped fine-tune their strategy and align their leadership team and board to be a cohesive driving force to achieve their dreams and outcomes. I want to teach you the same thing and more on how to scale and align your leadership team and board so you can increase your business growth and value. Get clarity on what is the next right strategy for you. There are multiple ways we can work with you. Number one, click the link for a free, non-obligatory 60-minute initial strategic session. Let's get a feel for your dreams, your vision, your challenges, and let me convert that into a route map for you where we can co-develop and co-pilot. Number two, enroll in an innovative and intuitive digital online course that I have created to help you transform. It's called Unshakable Resilience. It is the ultimate program for individuals and business leaders like you who want to be equipped at a personal and professional level to respond to any form of challenges or in crisis situations and take on opportunities with grit, resilience, and build a mindset of success. In essence, you want to be unshakable, thrive in crisis, take on opportunities in the face of adversity, and build a success mindset. So, click the link below to learn more on how I can personally help you individually and your firm to scale and align your leadership team and business and pivot in a transformational way. And for you to experience this, whatever the challenge you're facing, get in touch with me. Let's discuss, and I will share my insight rapidly to enable your transformation. Click the links below.